If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560, The Answer.
Dan and Amy, so two of our founding fathers famously died on the same day. What's perhaps less well known is that they spent much of their lives hoping the other was dead. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson we're talking about. And that relationship is the subject of a new book from Gordon Wood, who is a Brown University history professor emeritus, Pulitzer Prize winner. The book, Friends Divided, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, maybe some instruction for and some perspective for today's hostile political climate. Professor Wood, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
No, my pleasure. Thank you.
So John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, their complicated relationship, a little perspective on that.
Well, they were good friends at the outset because they both supported the American Revolution. They both supported independence for America from Great Britain. But they divided on almost every other issue, on their conception of the role of America, their conception of democracy, their views of human nature, you name it. There's almost nothing they agreed upon, except they did have one common thing. They both had an abiding hatred of Alexander Hamilton. But other than that, they were divided.
Well, and one of the big disagreements was over the power of the central government, right?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, Jefferson's a small government. He was a radical. The liberal radical position in the end of the 18th century is minimal government. The smaller the government, the better. Adams is a federalist, and although he's not a Hamiltonian federalist, he certainly did not worry as much as Jefferson about the federal government. But although Adams himself is keen on separating power, he was worried about power. So he said no power should exist without a check, and so he made contributions to American constitutionalism in that respect because of his fear of power. He's the one who really created separation of powers and the veto power given to the executive that exists in all states and of course in the federal government as well. Adams is really the author of that view.
And what was their breaking point? What was the one issue that divided them or started separating them?
Well, there are lots of issues, but the French Revolution, they both opposed. I mean, Adams was deeply opposed to it, and Jefferson was a Francophile. He loved the French Revolution, thought it was a continuation of the American Revolution, and supported revolutions everywhere. And Adams is a conservative. He feels that the people are dangerous, and you've got to avoid the kind of populism that emerged with the French Revolution, all those people being killed. And so he used to razz Jefferson about that because Jefferson was a true believer. I mean, in 1793, his successor as Minister to France writes him and says, "Mr. Jefferson, your friends are being guillotined by the thousands." And Jefferson sort of sloughs it off and says, well, if only an Adam and Eve are left alive and left free, it'll be worth it. Well, that's a pretty extreme statement to make, and that's the kind of view Jefferson had about the French Revolution. And
then the acrimony only intensified when they ran against each other in 1796.
In 1796, that's right. They were in opposite parties, but in those days, Jefferson became vice president and Adams became president because the man who got the most electoral votes became president, and the man who was second became vice president, regardless of party. Then they ran again in 1800, and that's probably the most scurrilous election in our history. And Adams was defeated, and he was humiliated because he felt that he should be reelected the way Washington was, and he refused to attend Jefferson's inauguration. He got on a 4 a.m. stage for Quincy, so he would avoid seeing Jefferson. And they didn't speak to one another or write to one another until 1812, when they were brought together by the great efforts of Dr. Benjamin Rush, who was a mutual friend, who worked 2 years to bring them together. It was not easy to do that. And then for the rest of their lives, they exchanged about 158 letters. Wow. And it was a great correspondence between the two that talked about a lot of issues: religion, inequality, aristocracy. They didn't talk much about slavery because Adams realized that that was such a sensitive subject for Jefferson that he wouldn't push him on it. But otherwise, he did push him on a lot of issues, especially about the French Revolution, because by 1815, Napoleon had been defeated. The Bourbons are back on the throne of France, and Adams loved to tease and razz, and he says, "What do you think of the French Revolution now, Mr. Jefferson?" And Jefferson took all this with good humor, and the relationship survived because I think Jefferson was so polite. Adams loved to tease and razz and rib people, and he certainly was ribbing Jefferson all the time, although not on the issue of slavery.
I just like your characterization of the 1800 presidential election to remind us that acrimony and name-calling in politics is not a 21st century invention. This has been happening since our country's founding.
Right, right. In fact, the whole antebellum period leading up to the Civil War was far more vicious than anything we've experienced. There was fisticuffs and duels and all kinds of things in the Congress. We haven't come to that yet.
Not yet.
So I think
we may get
should
back.
realize that things aren't as bad as they have been in our history. Of course, that climaxed with the Civil War, but we were close to a Civil War in 1798 as well. It's as close as we've come until the actual Civil War, where people were really divided over the threat of a French invasion of the United States, and Jefferson was keenly in favor of France, and this divided the country seriously.
He is Gordon Wood, Brown University history professor emeritus, Pulitzer Prize winner. The book, Friends Divided, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. Gordon Wood, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it. Good luck with the book.
Thank you for having me.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Here